And I'm going to show you another experiment that sort of gets at the same thing, but I've got to give you a little bit of background on the biology of the brain. So here is the same part of the brain again, the VTA, ventral tegmentum, and the nucleus accumbens. So I'm going to tell you kind of how the wiring works. You guys heard of dopamine? Yeah, that neurotransmitter? Okay, so I'll get into that. This is the wiring of the reward circuit for you. By the way, this part of the brain is involved in emotion. This part of the brain is very important. The hippocampus, right down here, pretty close, they're all together here, is involved in imprinting memories. If you go somewhere and something really good happens, if an animal finds food in a certain place, the hippocampus remembers that. That's the part that sort of says, okay, this is the place that you find food, and makes the memory for you to kind of drive that behavior to take you back to the same place over and over again. Hippocampus is really important. The frontal cortex of the brain, that's the part of the brain that says deferred gratification. It says maybe this isn't a good idea. That's kind of the thinking part of the brain that says, you know, if you do this, you might get in trouble. You might get arrested. You might get kicked out of school. Don't. Just put it off. This is the don't do it part of the brain that has an argument with this part constantly, all day long. Don't do it. Yeah, I want to do it. You know, this will be great. It'll be fun. I'll stimulate my nucleus accumbens. Nope, don't do it because it's bad for you. So that's the wiring of the brain there. Now, if we look at this, ventral tegmentum, I won't do too much of this for you, but just this. That's this part, the VTA. We're blowing it out. And right here, the nucleus accumbens, blowing it out right here. So dopamine, the dopamine story. I told you that nerves in the ventral tegmentum send their little connections to the nucleus accumbens, right? So here it is. They send their little wires, their little connections here, and they talk to the nucleus accumbens. The way they do that is using a neurotransmitter called dopamine. So dopamine in the brain is mostly made right there, ventral tegmentum. That's where it's made in cells, dopamine cells, that send their little projections, we call them, into the nucleus accumbens, and they release the dopamine onto cells in the nucleus accumbens. So if you were able to squirt dopamine onto the nucleus accumbens, right into it, that would have the same result as that electrode. You'd feel really good. That would be the risk reward, stimulating the risk reward. So this is how we're wired. We don't have electrical currents going into our head. We have a system inside that talks to the nucleus accumbens and activates it. So when something really good happens, when we find food, when we find a reward, the ventral tegmentum squirts a bunch of dopamine onto the nucleus accumbens. That's how it works. It's that simple. We just squirt a little dopamine on to the nucleus accumbens and we feel, like that rat. That's good. I want to do that again. That's how it works. We have a bunch of cells in this area that these are the brakes that put this purple one here, puts the brakes on these. So if you've heard of GABA, that kind of stuff, I'm going to come back to opioids in just a second, but these cells tell these cells to slow down. They limit the amount of dopamine they can release. So we have a kind of a complicated system that puts a brake on this risk reward, because you really don't want animals just running around getting food all the time. They have to do other things. They have to go back, make a nest, whatever. We have to do other things with our lives. So we have brakes built in to our the part of the brain, the ventral tegmentum, that talks to the nucleus accumbens. So it's kind of an on switch and an off switch. All substances that are abused will increase dopamine in the brain. Period, end of story. That's the dopamine connection. If a substance is going to be abused in human beings or in animals, it will increase dopamine in the brain, right? So what am I telling you? I'm telling you dopamine is the sort of the glue that binds this whole concept of addiction together, that they're all increasing dopamine here. All of them. Cocaine, for example, I don't think I want to talk about that. Cocaine, for example, increases the amount of dopamine right here directly. It doesn't really do a whole lot over here. It works to increase the amount of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens throughout the whole brain, but here in particular. So if someone uses cocaine and gets a big blast of dopamine right here, that's the same thing as hitting the button. That's the same thing as the electrical stimulation, okay? So that's what cocaine does. So, one more rat experiment. Just one more. Here's the rat, and this is a really famous one, and I have a video clip that talks about this one. So I thought I'd better show it to you. Really simple. You see this cage? Nothing in it, no distractions. Bottle of water, bottle of cocaine water. And they just looked at what the rats did. What do you guess the rats did in that cage? They just drank the cocaine water until they fell over, they weren't dehydrated, but fell over for lack of eating or doing anything else. They just went after this and after this and after this because the cocaine water was releasing a lot of dopamine here. It's the same thing as that lever experiment, same idea. So that's the wiring of the risk-reward system. How about opioids? A little more complicated, but I'm going to throw this at you anyway. What opioids do is they take the brake off. They take the brake off the system. When people, these are the opioid receptors. Turns out that when you give morphine, heroin, Oxycontin, fentanyl, any of those opioids, heroin-like, morphine-like drugs, when you give those, they kind of shut this system down. It shows that little arrow shows them blocking the effect of this brake. They take the brake off so that the dopamine neurons can just fire away as fast as they want. That's what a heroin high is about. It's rapidly just cutting the brakes off. Think of being on a hill and just taking the emergency brake off you go. This system starts rolling for a little while until the effect, the drug wears off. So that's how opioids work. Oh, I had that actually. So here they are taking the brakes off, blocking that brake.